Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I'm so glad you're here today because we are looking at something absolutely fascinating. The current administration has completely ripped up the traditional foreign policy playbook. So today, we're going to neutrally unpack the mechanics and, honestly, the real-world consequences of this totally unconventional approach. We're relying on some incredible, recent expert analysis to break down exactly how this new machine operates. So let's just dive right in.
Here is our roadmap for today. First, inside the decision machine. Second, the strategy of brinkmanship. Third, global ripples and reactions. And finally, the domestic boomerang effect.
All right, Section 1, inside the decision machine and the battle for the president's ear. Let's get into it. For decades, foreign policy was this very orderly, highly structured interagency process. But analysts point out that this old system is basically gone. In its place, a really chaotic, highly competitive inner circle. Behind closed doors, it's literally a fierce tug-of-war to define what a win looks like for the president. On one side, you've got the restrainers and prioritizers. Think Vance and certain folks in the Pentagon. They want to drastically reduce our footprint in Europe and definitely avoid getting bogged down in the Middle East. But pulling hard in the exact opposite direction are the pragmatists, like Rubio, who are pushing a much more hawkish, interventionist agenda. So you've got these factions in a constant grinding battle trying to steer the ship. But here's the kicker. Despite all these warring factions, the ultimate dynamic of this White House is perfectly summed up by Joseph Bra, the European director of the Trilateral Commission. He said, "Nobody dares him his entourage to tell the emperor that he's naked." Experts note that final decisions are actually highly personalized and, frankly, impulsive. The president has these locked-in views, like seeing allies as free riders or preferring strongmen over democratic leaders. And if advisors cross him, well, they risk losing their security privileges entirely, just like what happened with John Bolton. So even with all the factional fighting, almost nobody in the inner circle actually dares to give critical, contradicting advice.
So how do these internal battles actually play out globally? That brings us to Section 2, the strategy of brinkmanship and the art of the high-stakes deal.
Analysts have pinpointed this as the administration's core tactical playbook. It's brinksmanship. It's a very hardball, almost business-style strategy. The idea is to push the envelope, go as far as you possibly can, threaten massive tariffs or extreme military escalation, take everyone right up to the absolute brink of disaster, and then pull back. The whole overarching goal behind this high-wire act is pretty simple. Make absolutely sure the United States remains the unquestioned #1 global power in a highly competitive century.
But the big question is, does playing hardball actually work? Section 3, global ripples and reactions and the real-world consequences.
When you look across the globe, this strategy yields wildly different results depending on where you are. Take Venezuela. The tactic there was a swift regime change operation. The result? A highly televisable win with 0 U.S. casualties. Looked great on paper. But then pivot over to China. The U.S. tried escalating tariffs, and China pushed back hard. They used their monopoly on rare earth minerals like a massive metaphorical bazooka against our supply chains, which actually forced the U.S. to rapidly de-escalate. And then over in Europe, the tactic of threatening to withdraw troops and security, well, it's resulted in sheer fear. European nations are so desperate to keep their intelligence sharing and alliance intact that they're terrified to provoke the U.S. in any way.
So it's a very mixed bag, which brings us to the most heavily scrutinized case study right now, Iran. The administration went with maximum pressure here. We're talking military strikes right in the middle of ongoing ceasefire agreements. In fact, experts point out they actually bombed Iranian negotiators twice, literally while talks were happening. Analysts suggest this completely destroyed any shred of trust. I mean, it got to the point where Iranian officials allegedly demanded Vance be physically present in negotiations just to guarantee their own physical safety. Analysts believe the U.S. was trying to apply that Venezuela model here, hoping to easily pop in a replacement regime, but instead they ran into a fiercely complex and entrenched resistance.
And you can't ignore the massive ripple effect this brinkmanship has on military readiness. The administration has withdrawn aid from Ukraine, publicly humiliated allies like Germany. But the reality goes way beyond the rhetoric. There's a terrifying logistical issue happening. Because of the insane costs of the Iran conflict and severe budget cuts, U.S. military stockpiles are incredibly depleted, especially air defense interceptors. It's gotten so bad that a Pentagon policy planner recently had to fly to Brussels just to tell NATO that the U.S. literally lacks the capability right now to provide full Article 5 support if a crisis were to kick off in Europe. Let that sink in.
Now this is where geopolitical theory crashes straight into domestic reality. Section 4.
the domestic boomerang effect, and the economic reality.
53%. That is the massive, painful spike in gas prices that everyday consumers are dealing with right now. Because Iran controls critical choke points like the Strait of Hormuz, this escalating conflict has sent absolute shockwaves through the global energy market, and that lands squarely on your shoulders at the gas pump.
And right on the heels of that energy shock is a 3.8% spike in inflation. These numbers completely ground all those abstract foreign policy decisions we've been discussing into undeniable, hard economic reality. A conflict happening halfway across the globe has directly triggered an affordability crisis right in our own backyards.
So it's really no surprise the political blowback has been brutal. Analysts point out that the administration's polling has hit an all-time low, mostly for two big reasons. First, they've alienated their core MAGA isolationist base. Remember the huge campaign promise to avoid getting America into any new foreign wars? Well, the ongoing Iran conflict explicitly broke that promise. And on top of that, political experts highlight that these aggressive, super sloppy deportation sweeps have completely alienated everyday voters. People might have wanted tighter borders, sure, but seeing their own community members like nurses or kindergarten teachers swept up by undertrained tactical units has sparked massive public backlash.
All of this leaves us pondering one final, overarching question drawn right from our source material. Does going it alone, tossing out the traditional interagency process, alienating our historical allies, and relying on incredibly high-stakes brinkmanship, actually secure long-term American dominance? Or by pushing everybody right to the edge, does it just guarantee long-term isolation? It is a complex, incredibly high-stakes balancing act. I really hope this explainer helped you see the massive machine operating behind the headlines. Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep asking the big questions.